about the miracles of technology. All right. But anyway, welcome everyone to Story Time with LionHeart, as I'll be telling the story of Rhiannon, the Welsh goddess of the fairies. I've been kind of studying up of her recently. I guess I've had kind of an inkling for her as a recent. Some recommendations have been told of me and all that. But I will be telling the story about her here for this hour. Some few details about her for, just in case you want to know. She relates to the moon, gates the wind. Her number is 7, horseshoes. Animals connected to her are horses, frogs, dogs, and puppies, songbirds, dragons, badgers, and hummingbirds. For the plants, it's all white flowers: rosemary, sage, narcissus, pansies, daffodils, cedar, pine. For the incense and oils, it's lavender, geranium, narcissus, sandalwood, bergamot, and nerole. For metals and stones, crystal quartz, bloodstone, silver, gold, calcite, moonstone, amethyst, garnet, ruby, and turquoise. Colors associated with Rhiannon is white, silver, red, gray, dark green, gold, maroon, black, and brown. Her element is that of earth. Her day is Monday. Only appropriate that that's why I'm doing it now. Offerings is music, the planet, the moon, which is only appropriate, especially for those of you that got the chance to see it yesterday with that rare blood moon before the clouds kind of came in. The moon phase is waning. And in the Wheel of the Year, the Feast of Rhiannon is March 1st, the Willow Moon, April 15th to 12th, Ivy Moon, September 30th to October 27th, and 4th of July, May Eve, April the 30th. But I've decided to do this in an interesting place to tell this story. I'm actually upstairs in my upstairs bedroom. Let's see, let me take a look here. And so I have the mystical storybook here. And so now I shall tell you the story about her. A long, long time ago, when the trees and the mountains spoke to people, when the springs rose straight from the cold rock, and gods and goddesses walked through the land and whispered in the kingdoms of Ahat, Rhiannon appeared on her white horse upon the mounds of Gored Eberth. Now, this mound was what we call thin, because if you stood upon it, there was very little separation between the world and the senses and the other worlds. Few people dared to tread upon this ground. Yet, here she was, dressed in brocades of gold and silk, face covered in dew, glistening in the golden sunlight. She has decided not to marry her own kind, but come to the world of the human beings. King Pruel watched her, struck down by love. He had to have her. He called out to the very best of his horsemen to bring her to him. His servants started a chase on the finest horse in the kingdom, thundering through the fields and forests after Rhiannon, who simply turned her mare and began an easeful trot. Think of it much like that of the first Wayne's World movie. He was pretty much, oh yes, he shall be mine. Yes, he shall be mine. Some say her horse's feet never touched the ground. It moved like a shimmering light, always remaining just out of reach. She appeared again on the hill the next day, and the day after that. Pruel fell on his knees, called out for her, his agony echoing in the mountains and canyons. She turned now for she had always loved him, but would not be taken by force. It would have been kinder for the horse, she teased, if you had just called me for the first time we saw each other. she was seeking him as her husband. But now, having agreed to marry him, he was told to wait a full year before she disappeared into the mist with him. A year later, she appeared on the mound, as beautiful as ever, and bade Pearl and his entourage to follow her to the forest, where even the trees and rivers parted to make way for the wedding party. They arrived at a lake which reflected the entire universe. Beside it was her father's palace made of crystal, with spires that reached into the heavens. There they were wed. When she returned to take her throne at Wales, the forest sealed up behind her. She knew she would never be able to go back to the world in which she grew up. Yet the people loved her. During the day, the birds sang the most exquisite songs wherever she walked. At night, the moonlight followed her around, clothing her in beauty. In the third year, she gave birth. The room was full of light. The divine child emerged to grace the world. Water from her womb left the moist trail, filling the cracks between the stone of the castle floor. She rested in bed, slept long and deep, woman and goddess, muscle and bone, sinking to the tranquility of surrender. The woman in waiting, all 6 of them, cared for her, protecting her while she rested. Yet one evening, they all fell asleep, and when they woke, the baby was gone. Panicked, they grabbed a puppy and pulled him to the corner of the courtyard. They cut its throat, gathering its blood in a golden cup, which they smeared on Rhiannon's lips, face, and neck. The castle echoed with horrific screams. Rhiannon, they said, had taken her child, chewed him up, and swallowed him bit by bit. Pearl arrived in the room, saw the blood spattered on his wife's body. A raging crowd gathered around the castle, demanding justice. They had waited 3 years for their heir to the throne, and now infidel and cannibalism. Rhiannon, weak in bed, swore her innocence. Pearl, broken in grief, confronted by anger of his council and people, did not strongly defend her, nor would he divorce her. He asked for her life to be spared. Punishment was given. For the next 7 years, Rhiannon was to sit in front of the castle gate, wearing a horse collar. She was to greet the guests by telling her story and offering to carry them to the castle. Over the years, she bore her penance without complaint, accepting her fate, though few asked her to do the task. Throughout the country, word began to spread of her quiet dignity. The people began to question whether she was actually guilty. Then one day, a noble heard the story and came to visit, carrying a child. Hear the phoenix write, "Objection!" He met her outside the castle wall. She bent low under the yoke. He held up a piece of tattered golden cloth. Rhiannon recognized it. She had woven it for her baby. She bent down and pulled the covers away. Immediately, she recognized the child as her own. He had the eyes of her husband's pearls. Some say that years before, the baby was taken by a suitor that Rhiannon had forsaken. He had been found at the stable of Tyrion, the Lord of Gwent, who had been crying as Amira was given birth. The baby had been named Girl Worth Urin, or Girl of the Golden Hair. Years later, he became a great king. Though Rhiannon had suffered tremendously, she forgave her attendants. Today, even now, she is known as a goddess of forgiveness and understanding, who remains strong and steadfast in the times of great change, loss, crisis, and betrayal in marriage. When love is taken away, or when you are accused of wrong, remember to call upon Rhiannon. And that is her story. That's always what we would see, that whenever it would be the full moon out, or you felt like she was, where you were at your worst, you would call upon her. And she would ride in our horse with her golden hair. She'd be there for you. Always will be and always shall be. And I hope you have loved this story. Is there any questions, perhaps? No? I've been starting to do a few more rituals every now and again in her name as well. Athena kind of understands it. Like, as far as I can feel, she's not jealous at all, thankfully. But she's a beauty, and I guess it's also from my Celtic heritage that I kind of started to feel a bond with her myself. That I could almost dream I would be riding that horse with her through the backyard of my house, maybe through the open fields, the plains, perhaps. But perhaps, maybe, especially if you have to be going out, tonight, in the cold, but as the moon should be rising right now, even as we speak. Oh yes, I agree with you, Becky. It's especially if you're looking for lost families, especially with what she had to deal with. She's a good goddess to connect out to. But I've also, a lot of times, whenever I've driven home from like Fargo, and the full moon has been out, especially these cold winter months, or when it's storming all that bad, it's like I always kind of hope for a blessing that she would guide me home. She has yet to feel me wrong, thankfully, for the most part. I mean, there's been some close calls, but her horse has been there for me, thankfully. Yeah, you know that also well from all the times I've ever driven home from D&D. Those late nights. But that's all I had for her for the story. So I hope you all have loved it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to post this also on the podcast like I did for the prior story I did the other month here. And I hope you all have a good night. And if you see the full moon rising, do give a shout out to her. So everyone, merry meet, merry parts, and merry meet again. Blessed be.